This morning, we're going to have a panel discussion, and here's how it's going to proceed. I'm first of all going to introduce everyone on the panel to you. Several members of the panel have already been introduced this morning. Rachelle, Jervis, and Rachel Arfa have already spoken this morning. So I'm going to introduce the rest of the panel. Then we've prepared some questions that we're going to ask the panel, and I think whoever wants to answer can just jump in. And if nobody jumps in, we'll just have a long pause, okay, until somebody wants to jump in. We also invite people to ask questions in this portion. So bring up your concerns and issues. So let me jump into introducing the other people on the panel, and they have name tags. So we have, first of all, Fornessa Randal, who's the Executive Director at the Center for Asian Health Equity and the Asian Health Coalition. She's the Executive Director for the University of Chicago's Center for Asian Health Equity and the Asian Health Coalition, a community-based organization and affiliate of the University of Chicago. Her 20-year background extends to cancer disparities, research, public health, outreach, and administrative leadership. Fornessa has disseminated and transformed local health initiatives into statewide and national models and developed prototypes which have been recognized by both the National Institute of Health and Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. She's the former Assistant Director of the University of Chicago Medicine Comprehensive Cancer Center, Office of Community Engagement and Cancer Disparities, where she was instrumental in establishing and expanding partnerships within the Asian, African American, Native American, and Hispanic communities. She served as the Partnership Director for the NIH-supported P20 initiative, Chicago Southside Cancer Disparities Initiative, to address cancer disparities among African American and Asian American communities. Okay, let's see. And then we have Deb Hamilton, who is a firm advocate for inclusive practices for Illinois citizens with disabilities. She's co-founder and treasurer of Inclusion PAC, a nonpartisan grassroots political action committee which aims to help elect and re-elect legislators who support inclusive living for Illinois citizens with disabilities. Deb earned a BA in elementary education and an MA in special education from Bradley University. She's also a graduate of Partners in Policymaking and serves on the Public Policy Committee for the ARC of Illinois. And we also have Lori Fox, founder and president, Lori Fox Diversity and Inclusion Consulting. As president and founder of Lori Fox LGBTQ Business/Diversity and Inclusion Consulting, headquartered in Chicago, Lori works as a business consultant and personal coach, consulting with individuals and organizations on workplace inclusion issues, specializing in LGBTQ issues, in particular transgender inclusion in the workplace. Lori was formerly a director of human resources with McDonald's Corporation, where she provided HR, leadership, and diversity consulting throughout the U.S. and international assignments. Lori has been an active leader, trainer, and coach for a variety of local and national organizations, including Out and Equal Workplace Advocates, where she served on their national board of directors. Lori is also a member of the Human Rights Campaign's Business Advisory Board. And finally, we have John Pfeiffer, who is a social impact leader with more than 25 years of experience in nonprofit, government, and consulting organizations. He's a partner at Open Door Advisors, a consulting firm established in 2009 that helps leaders and organizations achieve greater social impact, growth, and sustainability. Previously, John served as First Deputy Commissioner of the Chicago Department of Family and Support Services, CEO of Inspiration Corporation, COO of Chicago Cares, Chief Development Officer of Chicago House, Director of Individual Philanthropy at Feeding America, and Senior Consultant with KPMG LLP. John holds a BA in Economics from Northwestern University and an MPA from Columbia University, and he attended the Executive Program in Social Entrepreneurship at Stanford University. He serves as Board Secretary of the Center for Housing and Health as the AIDS Foundation of Chicago and as a board member of the Back Office Cooperative, Pride Action Tank, and Social Enterprise Alliance Chicago. All right, well, I'm heartily impressed by the range of credentials and experience that our panelists bring to the discussion today. So thank you very much for all coming to talk with us and share your knowledge and experience, and also to interact with our ESC consultants. So let me kick off the questions by saying that, first of all, one of the things that occurred to us is that we've come a long way with inclusion and diversity in society in general from where we were, say, 50 or 100 years ago. How are nonprofits doing compared to society in general in this area? Because most of our consultants are involved in consulting with nonprofits.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me well?
Yes. Yes.
Great. So, my practice at Open Door Advisors, we focus on social impact organizations. That includes a lot of nonprofit service providers as well as associations and foundations and some sort of new hybrid entities that are in the kind of business social enterprise space, ventures. L3Cs, low profit, limited liability companies, benefit companies, etc. In my view, that sector, the social impact sector, is doing well on diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm passionately interested as a gay man and someone who kind of grew up looking inside from the outside in a lot of contexts. And I feel like the nonprofit sector, the social impact sector, is more intentional perhaps than the corporate sector, but that still the work, the sort of the value of leading with equity in mind isn't centered enough in the work. There's still more intentionality needed. There's more leadership needed to move us forward. I think we have made great strides, and yet so much needs to be done. We're still mired.
I want to add to that. I'm sorry.
Please.
This is not working. I want to add to that. Just looking at some of the data that's out there right now, within a study that I found, there were 42% of those organizations that were surveyed had female executive directors. 87% of those executive directors or presidents were white. Minimal representation from African Americans and Asians, so it's about 6%, 3%. But the really most alarming part about that is that this gap is actually not closing, it's actually widening. And between 2007 and 2015, that number increased by like 2.2% for Asian Americans and about like a 0.5% for African American individuals. And so I think that while the nonprofit sector generally is the heart of the community, we really are serving the community. Unfortunately, that number is not very much represented in the leadership among them still to this day.
And I would agree with that. It's interesting, this word of accountability and how do you hold, whether it's a for-profit or a nonprofit organization, accountable to bring in more diversity, inclusion, representation, and this national, it's an LGBT, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender organization in Washington, D.C. called the Human Rights Campaign. And they created, and if you know the word or use it in your consulting metrics, and they created what's called the Corporate Equality Index. And it ranks, based on surveys that are sent out to organization, it ranks your organization on a score from 0 to 100, 100 being the best. And so in corporate America, this benchmark or this metric has, out of just competition, has forced organizations to get better. And it has a whole series of questions on it. And I don't know if there's anything in the nonprofit industry, something like that could show how do we do, how are we as an organization, where do we, where are we in our policies and our hiring and all of that. So I would agree with what others are saying, but I think having metrics is a great way to help drive those accomplishments.
Follow up.
I'm happy to add to that.
Sure.
Oh, yeah.
So I think another opportunity for not-for-profits is to hire people with disabilities, so that you have people with disabilities will be at your staff, but also to look at your good recruitment efforts there's if you're not sure how to find people, there's a great program here called ADA 45, a basic leadership. It's housed at the Chicago Community Trust. It is a leadership development program for people with disabilities who want to become more civically engaged. And that includes joining boards of your not-for-profits. So that's a great way to increase your disability awareness by making sure that you have a person with a disability in the room.
Did you want to say something else?
I want to put a little plug in for hiring people with disabilities. Rachel mentioned earlier that people with disabilities have good problem-solving abilities, and that is true. It's a creative way of living. But people with there's an employment gap, a very large employment gap. 70% of all working age people without disabilities work, but only 35% of people with disabilities of working age work. So that disparity is not acceptable to many people who have disabilities. And what you'll get when you engage somebody or hire somebody with a disability is not just that creative problem solving, but also a real heart to work and a willingness to work. And that's a hard thing to get from a new employee sometimes. So that's my plug for hiring.
Let me just make one little follow-up. Just one interesting note. The nonprofit sector has, I think, been nudged along by funders, both on the public side, government side, and the private side, by requirements that they have diversity, equity, inclusion policies or equal employment opportunity policies. They've used the bully pulpit to essentially mandate that organizations are speaking to these issues, addressing any barriers in their cultures. That regulation, that sort of framework is only part of the equation, though. Without real intentional strategic thinking and day-to-day living of those values, organizations will only move so far toward a truly equitable workplace. But it's a unique feature, I think, of this sector as opposed to the for-profit sector, where unless you're a government contractor, maybe you don't face these kinds of external obligations.
Well, and in terms of moving along, we know that behavior changes tend to precede attitude changes. What behaviors can nonprofits begin to encourage in their organizations to eventually lead to attitude changes in this area?
Did you want to go? Yeah. Okay. There's a wonderful quote. You've probably heard it. It's called, "What you do speaks so loudly, I cannot hear what you are saying." And I think I talk on college campuses periodically, and individuals who are about to graduate and are looking in this very tech-savvy group of people that are about to graduate from the university, there is something that consistently comes up, and it is we go to an organization's website and we don't see anything that connects with us. And as an example, last night in preparing for this, I went to ESC's website. And I purposely looked for the words diversity and inclusion throughout the website, and it was not to be seen. And the website is your window to the world. People come to you, people explore you, and so inclusionary language and behavior, part of that starts with, and I always do that when I do consulting work, is look at the organization's website. What are the messages that are being conveyed or not conveyed? And what are the photographs of people? Are they all a certain age, a certain class, a certain color, or is there true diversity? This term called unconscious bias, where many people don't even realize what they project. And I think that's a part of behavioral change too, is doing the work the organization needs to do as you project out to the world.
Sorry, I just wanted to cough into a microphone. No. I agree with everything Lori said, and thank you for pointing that out. Something that happened a couple years ago was a couple staff members at ESC earned and received a promotion. And it was really important to me that those staff members who earned that promotion were announced in our public newsletter and on our social media, and that included a photograph. And that was because these long overdue promotions, which were earned, were something that we should all celebrate. But I also think it's important in our sector and in every sector that when there are leaders in the community, that we use them as role models. And I felt strongly, and I still do, that both of those women are role models. One of them is here today, so I'm not going to put her on the spot, but I still feel that way. And I think it's very important because it is important to see representation. It's critically important. The only other thing I would just add to the conversation about making sure that your intention is clear is Rachel made a great point earlier today that if you are having an event, and nonprofits have events constantly, that is a great opportunity for you to say, let us know the accommodations you need, and then put the contact information there. And it's the same thing for when you're posting jobs. You know, we encourage diverse applicants. If you need accommodations to apply for this job, this is how you do it. You're sending a very clear message that diversity is not an afterthought, that inclusion is not an afterthought, but that it is a serious part of how your organization operates. And I think it's something that I can do a better job at, and most nonprofits can do a better job at.
I want to also add, a couple of years ago, well, about 2.5 years ago, I took this role, and the board chair for our nonprofit is a Korean physician that's a gastroenterologist that works at the University of Chicago. And she had been asking me to take this role for many years, and as an African-American woman, she wanted me to lead an Asian organization, and I was like, okay, tell me what's going on here, your thoughts. And we talked through it, and she really felt that this was going to help lead to the attitude change within the organization. We were a small organization, about $1 million outfit at that point, and my skill sets and the things that I had done working within the Asian community in another state really drew her to me. And I said, you know, this is something that we need to do together. And you know, now with our organization, we see that attitude is changing. But it had to come, you know, from a position, from someone who was in a position to really see that vision coming from her own perspective. And I really love earlier, Rachel, you were talking about privilege, or Rachelle, you were talking about privilege. And I also tend to look at that, in my perspective, as platform. What is your platform? And I know that as an African-American woman in the leadership role that I have, my platform is a lot bigger than that of the Asian population at this point in our country. And I've been able to use that platform to affect that attitude change that we're talking about now. So those are the kind of things I think are very, very important.
Okay, on the other end of the spectrum, what are the nonprofit organizations who are leaders in inclusion and diversity doing currently?
I can point to a couple of best practices that I think are worth replicating. The first is in recruitment, for organizations to be very intentional about the avenues through which they announce and market new opportunities, right? So not just the traditional large hiring portals online. In the nonprofit sector, in each city tends to have something like the NPO.net. There are a couple in Chicago that are specific to the nonprofit sector. But there's also, I think, real value to be found in reaching out to organizations that represent underrepresented groups, and to be intentional about sharing those postings with those organizations so they can make them available, either through, you know, student groups or service organizations or workforce development organizations that touch job seekers from underrepresented groups. That's one. Second, I think, you know, I have seen firsthand the value both for the organization's internal culture and for individual employees of a mentorship culture. When organizations are very intentional about pairing, whether it's senior and junior staff member pairs for growth and leadership development mentorship opportunities, or also for young people seeking a career path, seeking to define their trajectory, to be able to pair them with a senior leader who looks like them and is from the same group and who's faced similar life experience. That's invaluable, and so, for example, I've been a mentor with a group called Urban Alliance that pairs young men and women from underrepresented groups, low-income areas, seeking to enter the workforce. There's nothing like having an ally who is a seasoned executive who, knows what it's like to kind of look in from the outside, to find a way in, and then to navigate once inside an organization. It's an invaluable sort of one-to-one relationship. It's deep, it's resilient, and I think it can teach people on both sides of the equation a lot.
All right. What are some memorable moments you've had while encouraging inclusion and diversity in your organization?
I won't specifically say my organization, but having worked on a board with a nonprofit organization, one of the things that we did a refocus on when we were bringing either board members or staff was to look at competencies, not only business competencies, but have a much more of a focus on emotional competencies. And looking at leadership, what does leadership mean? Relationships. How does a person how can they empathize with other individuals? And the more we started doing that, is clearly you got to have the business competencies for that specific job. But if you're going to have good teams, if you're going to have people working together towards a mission, a passionate group of people, you've got to have people who connect with other people at an emotional level. And so I think that is something that we started to do, and we saw the quality of the people that we were bringing in, both at a board level and at a staff level, to really start to increase and improve.
I will also add that one of the things that we enjoy in our organization is the ability to have, we have 19 members of our core staff. We have others that come in and out, interns and that sort of thing. But 13 of those 19 are all from diverse backgrounds. So we really celebrate that within our organization. But what's exciting about it and memorable is almost every week we have some event going on or something happening where we have individuals that are not from that particular population or community. If we're in the South Asian community, but we have someone that's from East Africa and a non-ethnic person that's there as well. And it doesn't matter. We're reaching everyone's really involved in every aspect of our organization, and that's really quite remarkable for the things that we actually are able to get done with the multiple diverse staff.
I'd just like to add one thing. It's been brought up already, but if something is going to happen, it has to start at the top of the organization. Senior leadership has to buy into it. There has to be a commitment. And as an example, we've used the words all this morning, this phrase, a culture of inclusion. And there are some organizations that say, all right, this is going to be our culture of inclusion. Here it is, we're going to post it. Or versus having the organization talk about that and say, all right, as an organization, what does that look like? What does that look like in our organization? What does a culture of inclusion mean? So that way you get more buy-in if you're having people from different levels, from board down to staff people, talking about what does that mean to us? How can we define it? How do we bring that to life in our organization.
What have been the biggest challenges that you faced in promoting inclusion and diversity in nonprofits?
Sorry. So one of the things that I realized early on in this role is that I had to really be able to inspire up. I read a book called Breaking the Bamboo Ceiling, and it's really about inspiring young Asian Americans or Asian individuals to rise up, and inspiring them to continue whenever the roadblocks are there. And it's really been really encouraging to see that our organization sort of grow in that, and really allowing individuals to come in and just grow and keep going. But the challenge has been, I feel, the challenge is to step out of the way when your inspiration starts working, and to really allow the individuals that you are encouraging to rise up to rise, and allow yourself to be trained. And we know that from leadership down things happen, but I also think that as leaders we have to be able to move out of the way so that we can realize a lot of the work that we've done. We can realize it in other people.
I think then some challenges are overcoming our own mindset and trying to make sure that I agree you have to set a tone for the organization. So my organization set up a diversity and inclusion committee, and we're in the process of setting up staff training for all of our staff, including an executive director down, because we want to make sure that, number one, we can prepare the skills at a time to be able to talk about different conflicts in diversity and inclusion, but we also want to make sure that we increase our own diversity from making sure we have people with disabilities, making sure that we have people of color, people from other underrepresented backgrounds. And I find that by being more intentional about these efforts, we have already started to make some progress, but we were able to get support from our leadership, and we have more to go. There's no clear roadmap out there. I did a lot of research to figure out how to do this, and there's a lot of different ways to get there, but no what we. So that's been something that we've been trying to figure out. But what you could just to get started. So sometimes that's the hardest part. Just get started and commit to what you want to achieve, and then you can't help but keep moving in the right direction.
I would just like to add something. I've had the privilege of working for several different nonprofit organizations, and one of the biggest challenges I have found around this issue is board members' attitude related to tokenism. I've heard board members say things like, we already have one. That is a serious problem, and it's incredibly demoralizing to the staff. The fact of the matter is, it is very rare to see a board in our community that represents the demographics of our community. And that should be a serious issue that we're all working on all the time. And you cannot, as a board member, form a coalition to get anything accomplished when you are the one or the two. It's not about checking a box and being a token. It's about, we cannot solve the serious challenges of our community with only one perspective or only two perspectives. We need every person represented. And that, getting board members to open their mind to that and to address that seriously, it's an ongoing challenge at many of nonprofit organizations, and I think it's really critical.
Yes,
How do I?
we are now. bring it to you.
I worked with a couple not-for-profit boards, and Rachelle's comments are so germane, because not-for-profit boards tend to be white older people, and I fall in that category. That's my diversity box. But be that as it may, the question is, all of these boards that I've been involved in all want to be more inclusive and more diverse and do all the things that you're talking about. I have not heard the, oh, we've already got one attitude. But it's so very hard to recruit and retain persons, especially with the get or give requirement that is substantial. So I would like to hear any comments that any of the board would have about that issue and how to address it.
So I'm at a little bit of a disadvantage in this discussion because I run a political action committee, not a nonprofit. But I can tell you, we made a concerted effort to assemble an inclusive board. And I threw the give or get requirement out the window. We were looking only at people who philosophically aligned with our mission. And by throwing that out the window, I was able to get some wonderful people on the board. So I understand the need to raise money and to spread the mission, but you can spread a mission through intellectual power and through diversity, I think, better than you can by attracting money. So
I would like to add something to that. The first thing I would say is people tend to recommend their friends to boards. They think of their friends, they think of their colleagues when they're thinking of board members. If all of your friends look like you, it's your fault. Do something about it. That's number one. I talked in my presentation earlier about how to make friends with people that don't look exactly like you. You might have to leave your house. Be prepared. Okay, so I'll get off my high horse and say that's problem number one. Problem number two is I reject the idea that there are a finite number of qualified, diverse candidates in a city this size. That's nonsense. As I gave the example earlier of Constance's father, he never considered the possibility of applying to a board until he was nominated by a pushy person in his life, right? That happens, and that needs to happen more. He worked at a corporation where the corporation would pay executives get gives to the tune of $5,000 a year. He just had to fill out a one-sheet piece of paperwork saying, yeah, he was still on the board, and then they would send the money. So the get-give can be overcome regardless of the income of the person. That's not an insurmountable thing. The other thing is, all nonprofits, and I'm guilty of this as much as every nonprofit, don't do enough to support the get part. So it's a big ask to go to a person who may not be involved in your organization and say, hey, can I have $5,000 and 7 Saturdays? That's a big ask, right? But if an organization, and I know this is something I myself need to work on, but if an organization works really hard to help their board be successful at the get part, then that kind of takes that issue away.
Anybody else? Okay.
I submit there is a big challenge to inclusivity and diversity, that is fear factor. And that includes fear of losing my piece of the pie instead of knowing that the pie gets bigger, it doesn't get reduced. The second one is resistance to change. Can you speak to that?
I agree with you. And I think it's also about fear of loss of control. I think privilege likes its power. And it's difficult, I think, for organizations, for leaders to extend invitations to join the table because it may result in a diminishment of their influence, right? I think you have to always go back to the power of we. As a group, a more diverse group brings more perspective, brings more talent, more insight, and a richer outcome, always, in my experience. And I think you have to focus on the additive potential that diversity brings and just kind of really keep people focused on what more, we can be greater together is, I think, the mantra.
I would also add, I was for a short period of time on a board where continuing that struggle of trying to find people. And so I made a decision to say, if you'll commit to 3 years, the first 2 years, there is no give-get. And to get the person hooked, so to speak, and get them involved in the organization, and that the give-get didn't start until year 3. And so all of a sudden, a lot of people's guard was down, and being able to say, well, I can't afford, I can't afford the first year, second year, but if you'll commit to 3 years and learn the organization, get in, passionately involved, it's a way to professionally seduce people, to bring them in so that they really, they hold that enthusiasm, they hold that passion for the organization. So it's a tactic, but I've seen it work.
Question?
Thank you. I have the privilege of serving on a board, VNA, Visiting Nurse Association of Fox Valley. We are also a federally qualified health center, and we are required by the federal government to have half of our board be members of our clinics. Well, we have clinics in medically underserved areas. The 2 unintended consequences are obvious. One is that at board meetings, we have to be very careful that Norm and I don't sit at one end and talk about our stock portfolios, where the 2 poor ladies from the medical end who have agreed to spend 3 years of their life on this board sit there and worry about the fact that their kids are in a school with no vaccinations. That can be overcome, and we work hard. And I heard the suggestion about mentoring. I'm going to board meeting this afternoon. I'm going to bring that up with the CEO. The other problem, of course, is with foundations. The foundations require nowadays 100% board participation. Well, these young people, they're mostly younger than the rich white guys at the other end of the table, are economically disadvantaged. And that's a real disadvantage. You have to meet these people and talk with them and understand. It is a severe disadvantage, as somebody pointed out, agreeing to serve on a board for 3 years when you have severe problems at home with money. How do you fix this? And the problem is with foundations, I think, partly. Is there anything any of us in this room can do, or maybe ESC can do, in talking to foundations and pointing out to them that diversity of the board and diversity of their mission should count as much as how many Pritzkers they happen to have on their board? Is there anything we can do to fix that? Because I feel it's a sort of a disadvantage when we have to go to people and point out that, our board members are not well-known people. It's also hard to get board members.
Ex-Governor Ronner's looking for work.
It's a double-edged sword. I think it's a good idea that the federal government requires 50% of the board. But as I say, you have to be very cognizant of the fact that that's 2 unintended consequences derived from that. Besides the mentoring, what else could?
Part of what I'll say is that one thing we had to do once I came on board is we had to really diversify our portfolio, so that we weren't constantly, being forced to do things that were not within what we enjoyed doing or what we were going to do. And it was really, again, this goes to behavior change leading to attitude change. And our behavior became, we were going to seek funding and be funded and supported by organizations and groups that supported our mission. And it supported it in the way that we wanted. So we said no to some money, and we said yes to other funds. We were in a position to do that because we had built up enough financial equity and programmatic equity so that we could begin to say no. And I feel like one of the things that you said earlier was, use your dollars to advocate. I don't remember your phrase, but
Support inclusion with dollars and deeds.
yeah, exactly. And so that's kind of, if you can get an organization to grow to a place where they can begin to say no, and have others desiring to want you on their portfolio. There was an organization, a national organization, a pharmaceutical company, and we had some real problems with some of the things that they were doing, but they really, really pursued us because they wanted us on their portfolio. So then we're in a position where we had the cards, and that's a nice position to be in.
Any other questions?
Okay, I have to confess, I'm very aware of ethnic diversity and of LGBTQ diversity. I'm not as aware in terms of responsibility to physical challenges. And one of the issues that most nonprofits have is money, quite often. And I think in terms of where you locate your nonprofit, where you hold your events you can do, you have a lot of control over that. But there's some things like I'm not sure what we call it, but the closed captioning is what I call it here. Or I'm sure there's similar things for people that are blind to support. How do you go about as a nonprofit addressing those and finding solutions? Are there sites or are there organizations that cheaply can help nonprofits figure out how to do that? Sorry, long question.
The experience question first, I think you need to add it to your budget. Just like for accessibility, just like you would budget for food, just like you budget for space, for electricity, because right now there's an attitude that providing accessibility is something extra. It should not be, it should be something that you plan for, and you will cover that way in terms of telling your members and the funders in the community what your efforts are. But if you approach it as another expense, that message will get communicated to. So right now, as you plan in budget for next year, add some money for accessibility. And I'm happy to provide information not to the service providers. Your copy here provides open captioning. There are some great sign language interpreter agencies. The Chicago Lighthouse, where the Bride has a lot of different resources to put many of the accommodations out there to make your events accessible. Also, not as expensive as you might think. For example, should make your documents available in Word format so that people who use screen readers can access them. Does not cost you a dime. Maybe if you have someone who has mental disability, maybe they need a more flexible work schedule, breaks, or working from home. Again, those things don't cost money, but I think it's good to plan and anticipate any needs so that when the need comes up, you are better able to respond. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, I just wanted to say a lot of things are free, as Rachel mentioned. And if your nonprofit is in a space that's not accessible and you need it to be accessible, really they all should be, you can talk to the building management or the event host, and usually they will make accommodations. And in many cases, they have equipment to make it accessible, and they have, for some unknown reason, have put it in some annex far, far away where it serves no purpose. And when you speak to the building staff and you talk to them about it, they will have their employees drag it out and make it available. The other thing, and I think this gets to the foundation thing as well as just in nonprofits in general, is I think it's easy for people in positions of power and privilege to put a lot of constraints on how their team members think and work and do. And they don't realize they're doing it because they know what works for them. And so being flexible about how team members engage in the work that they need to do, and when you're asking them to do what, is a simple way to accommodate everyone. And it actually is a good way to allow people who have very different lives to be active leaders in your organization. For example, people frequently think about the telecommuting issue as it relates to childcare. And they say, well, it's important to allow some flexibility around telecommuting because of children. But actually, just as many people would like flexibility around telecommuting for elder or loved one care, or for economic reasons, because it's quite expensive traveling somewhere, taking multiple hours out of your day every day, paying to park, paying for public transportation, paying for the clothes and the dry cleaning that are involved in physically being somewhere so your boss can stare at you to make sure you're working. Like that, there's lots of reasons why people need flexibility at work, and it's not always because of specific challenges. It's because of things in their life. And if you want to have the best possible people helping you, it's important to be as flexible as you can possibly be.
I just want to offer one resource, one terrific website that can help navigate the world of opportunities. All the wonderful nonprofit organizations working on disability advocacy and solutions to create greater access is the Mayor's Office of People with Disabilities in Chicago. Commissioner Karen Tamley is an excellent leader, and that website is just rich with information and links to all the various players in town. There are a lot of organizations that would be happy to help, and it's just a matter of getting to the right person and starting the work.
Mayor's Office
Of People with Disabilities.
Question?
I would like to ask the panel if seniors are included in your definition of diversity. No.
So as a former city official, I can speak to this with some passion too. The demographic shifts in our country, around the world, are staring us in the face. Right? We have an aging world, and there is a movement being led by the World Health Organization to create age-friendly cities and communities. Chicago is part of that international movement, and it's essentially about just making leadership conscious of the challenges faced day to day by individuals who are older, and creating a city that's accessible and equitable for everyone across the lifespan, right? So I would say yes, and there's a lot more to be done to address the simple and the more complex needs of an aging population, but it's a huge challenge.
Any more questions from the audience?
Earlier today, Emma talked to us about illusion or inclusion circles rather than diversity boxes. Do any of you have any experience with inclusion circles? And if you do, could you tell us about what your experience is?
So just for the benefit of the people on this panel who weren't here during Emma's talk, she was saying that people are frequently asked to check boxes. And as a Puerto Rican American, she feels that none of the boxes offered to her are appropriate to define her. And she doesn't appreciate being forced to check boxes that actually aren't how she sees herself and have never been how she sees herself. And it makes her uncomfortable, and frankly, it's not fair. That's my assessment. It's not fair. And so what she's encouraging people to do is to think, instead of in this little box of things you check or don't check, in a circle where you talk about how you feel and how you identify yourself. And it doesn't necessarily have to do with your ethnic or cultural background. It could be how you see yourself in your professional life or your personal life or in many other things. Because when we're forced into these tiny little wooden holes, we tend to not feel represented. And so she works at a very big law firm, and it's very common in big corporations for them to look at their diversity in terms of who checked what. And she, as a leader in the diversity movement in that company, has said, no, let's let people, as they come in all of our staff on an ongoing basis, continue to reevaluate what is our real makeup? How do we identify ourselves? So I think Mike's question is, has anyone had any experience helping people think about how they identify themselves in ways that aren't about checking boxes? Or have they done that personally?
I'll share, it was kind of a painful experience. As a former business person working for a large Fortune 100 company, I lived the first half of my life as male. And I identify as a transgender woman. And I never felt safe in coming out within my company. And the reason I never felt safe was their idea of a culture of inclusion was very narrow. There were no policies that said, our EEOC policy, race, color, creed, age, sex, national origin, veteran status, there was nothing that said sexual orientation or gender identity and expression. And the messages that I heard, the jokes that I heard, the language that I heard and felt kept me in a deep, dark closet for a long time. And those are powerful messages. And it's not just, as a person who identifies as trans or LGBT or as a woman, there are messages that are being conveyed in the organization that make it not a safe place. Not physically. It wasn't physically unsafe. It was emotionally unsafe because of the messages and because of the lack of inclusive policies that were there. And so, and as I got to know other people within the company, there would be large conventions, but the LGBT population would sneak off and have dinner together because it wasn't safe. So as you look at the organization and see how inclusive are we, and what does inclusivity really include? So I just, difficult time for me. I knew since I was a child who I was, but it was very difficult to be your authentic self and come out if you don't feel safe in the workplace.
And we'll take this as the last word.
Okay, sorry.
No.
So thank you so much for sharing that. I really feel like this definitely feeds into what I'm about to say as well, which is sometimes, when you look at those diagrams, different things, that could seem a bit overwhelming. Like, I'm a practical sort of person. Let's just get something done that really is helpful. And I think that what you shared is really, just ask. Ask people. Ask the question. And sometimes you're uncomfortable. You don't know what to say. Or you might. I love the ADA. She was say, if someone's blind, don't say I see you later, and don't feel bad. It's just, we're gonna make mistakes, and in some ways, I say this consistently to many populations that or people who are non-ethnic. I say, give yourself a break. Don't get all crazy. Trying to answer everyone and fill every box and do everything, because you're gonna fail if you try and do that. But what I will say is just ask. Within our organization, our name signatures. Someone who's from the LGBT community came to me from my staff, and she said, let's modify our name signatures. I'm going to tell you what we should say. He, how do you identify? She, her, what, I was like, okay, explain that to me. So I just asked. I didn't feel uncomfortable, but I felt a little uncomfortable, but I just felt like I needed to ask. And a lot of times we jump into a big thing when we know no one can really do all of that. Just keep it simple and try to do what you can in that moment. A lot to what you have said. And ask questions and apologize first and ask the questions, because I think that you'll feel better and they'll feel more comfortable and more willing to talk with you in those situations.
Well, I want to thank all of you on the panel for sharing the breadth and depth of your knowledge and experience with us. I think it's been extremely helpful and interesting, and pointed us in some good directions. So thank you so much for joining us.